It was a dark, cold night when Carlos, a young pizza delivery guy, received a strange order. The address surprised him, a house on the outskirts of town, deep in a nearly forgotten forest. What really unsettled him was what he overheard at the pizzeria before heading out. His co-workers whispered that the house had been abandoned for years. "It's just a myth," he told himself as he drove down the winding road into the dense woods. When he arrived, the first thing he noticed was that the house looked even older than he had imagined. The windows were broken, and the paint on the exterior walls, peeling from years of neglect, gave it a ghostly appearance. Despite his unease, he reminded himself that he just had to drop off the pizza, get paid, and leave. As he stepped out of the car, he noticed there were no lights on in the house, but strangely, the front door was slightly ajar, gently swaying in the wind. With the warmth of the pizza in one hand and a flashlight in the other, he cautiously approached the entrance. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. Unsure whether to go in or leave the pizza at the doorstep, he decided to take a step inside. A long, dark hallway stretched out before him, and the air inside was thick, heavy with the smell of dampness and something else, something foul he couldn't quite identify. The silence was deafening, broken only by the creaking of the wooden floor under his feet. He walked down the hallway, calling out once more for whoever had ordered the pizza. But only the echo of his own voice answered him. Suddenly, a sound behind him sent a chill down his spine. It was a whisper, low and drawn out, as if someone were saying his name. Carlos immediately spun around, shining the flashlight down the empty hallway. There was no one there. His heart began to pound in his chest. Then he saw it. At the far end of the hallway, barely illuminated by the beam of his flashlight, a figure stood motionless in the darkness. He couldn't make out its face, but he could feel it watching him. "Hello?" he called out, trying to sound brave, though his voice trembled. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to move toward him, slowly, silently. Something was wrong. The figure's body seemed to decay with each step, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the walls. Panic gripped Carlos. He stepped backward, but tripped over something on the floor. Shining his flashlight, he saw an old, dismembered doll, covered in dust. The air around him grew frigid, and a sudden, inexplicable wind swirled through the hallway. The walls began to creak, and objects around the house trembled as if some unseen force had taken hold. The whispers intensified. This time, it wasn't just his name. He could hear incoherent words, as if dozens of voices were speaking at once. The sound was overwhelming, unbearable. The figure kept moving closer, now dragging itself grotesquely as if its limbs were broken. Carlos bolted toward the door, terror completely consuming him. But when he tried to open it, he realized that the door, which had been ajar just moments ago, was now firmly shut and wouldn't budge, as if something was holding it in place. He pounded on it desperately, shouting for help, but his cries seemed to be swallowed by the house. Suddenly, everything stopped. The whispers fell silent, the wind died down, and the house was plunged into an eerie stillness. Carlos, shaking and breathing hard, slowly turned his head, dreading what he might see. The figure was right in front of him. It was taller than he had imagined, its face a blur of shadows and decaying flesh. From its mouth came a low, guttural murmur. But then, something worse happened. From the walls, spectral hands began to emerge, thin, elongated, reaching toward him, surrounding him, their touch cold as ice on his skin. In a desperate act, Carlos shut his eyes, pushed against the door with all his might, and finally, it gave way. He fell onto the damp ground outside, rolling away from the threshold. Without looking back, he scrambled to his feet and ran to his car. Once he was safely inside the vehicle, trembling, he started the engine. Before driving off, he glanced one last time at the house. The figure was standing in the doorway, watching him, still and silent. With his heart ready to burst from his chest, Carlos floored the gas and didn't stop until he reached town. He never told anyone about what happened that night. And he never, under any circumstances, went near that place again. But deep down, he always wondered who had ordered that pizza. And worse yet, what did it really want?